Hi, everybody. Sorry, that took me a few minutes. I am just fiddling here. There we go. We have so many windows open now. It is tricky to see what's going on. I am thrilled today. Friday, 12 o'clock, The Writing Game. You are on the writing.ie Facebook page, and we are also broadcasting to YouTube. I'm thrilled to welcome Philip Ardagh, who has written over 100 books, both fiction and non-fiction for adults and children. And he's best known for his hilarious Eddie Dickens series. And, well, I mean, there are so many different series, The Grunts, all sorts of different ones. As well as working with Sir Paul McCartney on High in the Clouds, which is currently in development for Netflix. Philip has also penned The World of Moomin Valley, which is the first official guide to the Moomins, which obviously makes him a very special person for those of us who love Moomins. He's an absolute regular at Irish events. I've met him down in Listowel Writers' Week, and I first met him at Towers and Tales in Lismore Castle, which was absolutely a total experience in terms of a literary festival. It was just wonderful. And we did a panel on publishing, and I can truly say I have never laughed so much at an event. So we're going to be delving into his writing process today, but I think you might be in for a few laughs as well. So let me bring in Mr. Trewin, and then we will bring in Mr. Ardagh. There we are, Simon.
Good morning.
Good morning. And here's Philip coming through too.
Very good.
There we go. Now, let me, I've got to try and get rid of myself now. That could be tricky.
You are, yeah. We're all trying to do that, I think, at the moment.
Right, I shall leave you to it.
Philip, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
So, I mean, clearly, after that introduction, we need to have a really, really serious sort of, no laughing, nothing. I mean, I have to say, I woke up to your Facebook post this morning about the size of the furniture in the Oval Office, which I thought was, I mean,
wonderful.
If you were creating a children's book that had Donald Trump as a character, do you think you'd get away with that, or do you think?
Not until we'd had someone like Donald Trump as president, and then they'd all be clamouring for it. Quite extraordinary. The fact that they think by sticking a presidential seal on a Fisher-Price toy desk suddenly gives him gravitas is extraordinary. I want to see that seal on the side of Dodgem cars, permanently on the garage door of the Four Seasons landscape garden parking lot.
Yeah,
it's beyond parody. It really is.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of things about this year we will look back on, but I think that kind of constant rumble of Donald Trump's madness is sort of just astonishing, really.
Very, very dangerous. I think.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I ridiculed him is I know that dictators hate being ridiculed. You know, Mussolini and Hitler weren't known for their sense of humour, so I do it for that reason. But as perhaps we'll be discussing later on, one shouldn't confuse being funny with lack of seriousness. You can be funny and very serious. And I'm using that humour as a weapon. I'm glad to suck some joy out of a potentially extraordinary, dangerous man. We have to remember he still has the codes for the nuclear missiles.
Yeah, I think last night he was shouting at some reporter, "You can't say that to me. I'm the president of the United States." And there's a lot that's going to happen between now and the 20th of January. It's like watching a Kubrick movie, isn't it, at times?
No, very, very, very worrying. I think the film Capricorn 1 is that the one where they fake Mars landings or moon landings.
Yeah, fake news, yeah.
And I remember when that was touted about, no one would take that movie. They're saying it's too incredible, it's too ridiculous. And then Nixon's Watergate happened. And it was after that the screenplay was represented, and suddenly people could see, well, yeah, there are these deceptions. Nixon is having his car smashed up. I mean, one of his greatest, simplest acts, rather more clever than what we see Trump doing, was when a number of anti-Vietnam students were surrounding his car and shouting at him things. And it was a very powerful image of the people being against the president. So what he did was the car was fine. He then had the car smashed up. And then he showed the car and said, "This is what the students did to it." And it turned public opinion. Very, very clever. And Trump tries these things, but he doesn't quite have the nous to pull it off, thank God.
You clearly, I think a lot of people find social media very challenging and don't quite know what it's for. But you know, you've introduced your YouTube channel, which has had everything from beard trimming clips to
clips of beard trimming,
more or less serious things. But you enjoy social media. You enjoy the kind of.
I had never really. I'd always been on Facebook, but kept that quite small and just talking to people who I didn't necessarily know, but got to know on Facebook. But I'd never been on Twitter. And then when Nosy Crow was set up, a small independent publishing company set up by Kate Wilson and her husband, and they wanted a name, so I came along with a little-known illustrator called Axel Scheffler, who since has ridden on my back and gone on to success. And they said, but one of the things we want you to do is tweet. And I had a look at what people tweeted about, and it's, I've got a new book coming out, or I've just been this, or here's my book, or I've been in a shop. And I thought, no, I will be me. And this will again come as a shock to some people. Just because I primarily write children's books, I have genitals. I know how to use them. I swear, and I do all these things that adult authors do as well. There is this belief that if you get a group of children's authors together, you should maybe have a clown and some nice pink icing cakes. But we are actually adults who primarily write for children. So I decided my internet persona, if you like, would have the same voice as me, because I don't know if we'll talk about voice today. But if you know me and then you read my books, you'd say, oh, your books sound a bit like you, or very like you. Or if it's the other way around, if you read my books and then you meet me, you go, oh, you sound just like your books. And I think voice is very important. And I put as much effort into an email or a shopping list or a ransom note as I do a book. So my tweets still have my voice, but they can be my adult voice and I can say things. And also there's that shock value. If I say something very sweary or very shocking, and there's a reason for it. It has that value because he's a children's author and you wouldn't expect him to do that. But I have to say I'm lucky because, so I mean, recently there was children's writers were saying, what are you doing about going back to schools? Are you doing school events? Because a lot of writers get their money from that. Or are you doing it virtually? Are you doing digital events? And I said, well, you know, children are unpleasant at the best of time, whether or not they're disease ridden, and this is a great opportunity not to have to see them. I would do it digitally, preferably if they see me but I don't see them, but for untold riches. And someone said, oh, I wish I could say that. Well, of course they can, but you have to cultivate these extraordinary. So I'm slightly distracted. I don't have any mirrors in my house and very few shiny objects. And the fact that I can actually see myself while I'm talking is just a wonderful bonus. But I'm getting slightly sidetracked.
Well, I mean, you know, that's the reason we invited you on. It gave you an hour to look at yourself.
Yes, and people can watch with the sound down and just appreciate my physical beauty if they're not interested in what I'm actually saying.
Maybe it's another angle for your YouTube channel. So what I want to do is I want to go all the way back to. You talked about school. Well, at 2.5, you didn't go to a nursery school, did you?
No. For some reason, I think I have a big brother who's smaller than me, but he's still my big brother. And he went to school, and I think I really wanted to go to school as well. I never throughout life really wanted to do what my big brother did. I have no interest in sport, so if he kicked a ball around, I didn't want to kick a ball around. If he rode a bicycle, I didn't particularly want to ride a bicycle. But he went to school, and I wanted to go to school. So I went to proper school. And I learned, I think my mother had already taught me to read or was in the process of teaching me to read. And I sometimes think that's a bit of a shame because it means well, this is Janet. Janet is a girl, she likes pink. You know, if you're reading this, you can already do it. You become bored. Whereas if you are about the same level as other people, in fact, you're sharing and learning at the same time. So although I could read from a very early age, I don't think that was necessarily an advantage. I love the nature table. I love Pussy Willow, Catkins, Honkers and Acorns, but never really a huge fan of school, to be honest. I went to 5 in total, and you know, not a great lover of them. But the one thing I did love was libraries, and I worked in the libraries. I think I've confessed before, but I'll do it again, that some of the junior schools I was at, I'd given some butterfly tape, which is like sellotape, but not so good, to repair torn books. So I tore a couple of books so that I could repair them. So I always loved books as physical objects, and I'd always loved English. English was my favourite subject.
And was there a particular teacher in any of those 5 schools that was influential on you that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, absolutely. She may be dead, but she still gets a shout out. Her name was Mrs. Eubank, and in the way that we talk about hoovering today, even if we mean using a Dyson, I hoovered thing. A Eubank was a make of push along, unplugged hoovery type thing. I can't remember what you call carpet beater or something. I don't know what you call it. You can still buy them. So it's quite funny. If you do get bored when I'm talking, please turn and look at your bottom. It's not at all distracting.
Water.
Yes, good. So she was absolutely fantastic. She was incredibly encouraging. I like to think she was with all children. She probably was, but certainly with me, she was very encouraging. She had us do talks and things. And I remember in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, Elizabeth Beresford wrote The Wombles. She was best known at the time for being married to the man who introduced an antique program called Going for a Song, which began with a mechanical bird going cheep, 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 and they'd go and they'd be handed objects and they'd say, what do you think this is? And they'd discuss it. So he was her. She was his husband. She was his wife. We can edit this out. This isn't live. Anyway, so she wrote this book called The Wombles, and in the pictures, they were nothing like the Wombles we know today. But I was really taken by this book. I felt there was something really wonderful about the idea of these litter picker-uppers who lived in boroughs and Northern Common. So when Mrs. Eubank said, I'd like you to choose a book and give a talk about it, I chose to talk about them and their creation, and she gave it the title "The Ethnic Origin of the Wombles." So there I was doing this talk about ethnic origin of the Wombles, and I got up and I talked, and people laughed, and I talked more, and people laughed, and I was talking about books. I was standing up, I was doing all these things that I found I loved. Because of course, one thing about being a writer, and again, hopefully we'll touch on that, is when I later became a professional writer, it's nothing like it is today. You are on your own and you write and you submit it to whoever. There's no one to say, hey, I'm writing a book to. There weren't the creative writing courses. There weren't the writing groups. There weren't reading things. There was no social media. Your only telephone was a landline. Completely solitary thing. So many writers, many good writers I know, shouldn't be allowed in public. I remember years ago, I was at a Macmillan party and someone was waving a fork around, and I thought, madam, you really need a cork on the end of that fork. And then I noticed that her necklace was small clementines that she had varnished and that was wearing as necklace. And I thought, you should not be allowed out in public for your own safety and the safety of others. But I thought that's probably why you're such a brilliant writer. Because she couldn't articulate in the real world, so she lived in this world and she communicated through her pen, and that's what's so sad today. Because my beard is an area of special scientific interest. My face is an area of outstanding natural beauty. I have a lovely voice if you close your eyes. Even if you open your eyes, my voice still sounds the same. But you should be expected to have these things is a real shame. I mean, there might be a fantastic writer whose books you absolutely love, but someone said, have them on your broadcast, and they'll just sit there in silent shaking. So it was Mrs. Eubank who opened up this whole world, brought all these elements together, and made me think, I quite like to be a writer.
And did she was she aware of your first book coming out, do you think? You didn't go back to the school or anything?
You see, I think in my mind I thought she was about 840 in 1960.
She was probably 37, wasn't she?
Yes, exactly. So I imagined that she was long departed from this world. But I do like to mention her name, and maybe someone will join the dots. And
what was the school?
Oh, no. For legal reasons, I mention the name of none of the schools. What I will say is, of the 5 schools I went to, 3 were closed.
Right.
And a teacher in one of them is currently serving a sentence. So, yeah.
Okay.
See, very serious again. You can be funny, but cover serious.
Yeah, no, very, very serious. So there was another detail I read somewhere which I thought was fantastic. Your father used to get given at Christmas a lot of kind of diaries emblazoned, I imagine, with kind of by Acme sand or whatever it was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kev's Garage.
Yeah.
And back in the day, the family pronounced it garage. Now,
indeed.
Before say it's garage. I'm sorry, I'm still
no.
Garage. Yes, no, my father. That was the thing. In those days, in England and Ireland, you got glasses from petrol stations. You could save up, and you could get an jar from National, and you could also get football in the UK. You could get football medallions and try and collect the set thing. So those are the only two things you could get from garages. Everywhere else did Green Shield stamps, Pink Shield stamps, cart stamps, and just about the only bit of merchandising people had thought up was girly calendars for tyre companies and diaries with things on the front cover and everything.
Right.
And my father had this big pile of diaries, and it was great because I really, really was excited at the idea of writing. I think I was born a writer, and again, without retreading, I try and speak as I was talking to you before we came on air, giving you a long list of do's and don'ts. Never turn your back on me, except the bottom, that sort of thing. I was saying to you that because you sometimes get asked similar questions, you end up coming up with the pat answer, and I have to slightly here, but I really love the idea of writing, always have. I saw books and thought, oh, I'd like to do them. So my dad would give me his old diaries, and they looked like a book. They had a cover and they had blank pages. And before I could write, I'd do squiggles because they looked like paragraphs, and I'd draw pictures. I remember once I had a story about a dog finding a coin, and I realized that I could draw the dog, but for the coin, I could actually do a rubbing of the sixpence. So I couldn't necessarily draw, but I was bringing design skills to the table. So I do that, and then as I got older, I'd start writing sentences and bits of stories and more. So I still have somewhere diaries with early Ardagh stories in them. And it was very nice because it became a physical object. Because I've always been interested in the process, in the having the ideas, the sharing the ideas, and the physicality, whether it's the pen or the typewriter. Because again, I was fortunate enough when I started trying to write professionally. I'd write in longhand, then I'd write on a typewriter, and cutting and pasting would literally mean cutting bits out, or sticking it together, getting it photocopied, or just dealing with it like that. And then from that, I went to an electronic typewriter where you could actually see the sentence before it. And then Amstrad computers, and then so on and so forth, and word processors. So I really have lived through all these different stages of doing it. And I love that is a part of the process to me. And you will hear, I'm sure you've had writers on who talk about editing. And I see on Twitter, writers will say, oh, I'm doing the editing at the moment. And I don't differentiate. I think editors do the editing. That's when someone else comes back to you. I call it rewriting because it's all a part of the same process. You write pages and pages. When the book finally comes out, some of those paragraphs will probably be the same as they were when you first put them down. Some would have been reworked and reworked. Some you would have hit a brick wall and gone off at tangents and torn those bits up and come back. And part of writing, we all talk about the creativity, but part of writing is you don't see the joins. I don't want you to know that I wrote that and never changed it. And this went over here, then over here, and I tore it up. And that, so I don't see it as editing. I see that as part of the writing. Writing isn't just physically sitting down, because you're engaging your brain as you're going typing. So I, for me, saying I'm editing is not useful because it suggests it's just cutting it down to 70,000 words or whatever it is, but it's still as much applying the writing mind, I think.
So you've written, as Sam said at the beginning, you've written over 100 books. And you also talked about how, if you're interviewed a lot, if you're not careful, you have kind of stock responses. Do you have a way of writing a book now that is helpful, or do you have to kind of snap out of that and make each book a new journey?
Each book is a new journey, even if I'm just trying to think of maybe just delving back in. Right, okay, here's an example of a children's book. And it was written for the National Trust in the UK. Oops.
Yeah, there we go.
It's a part of a series called The Secret Diary of. And the National Trust said, look, we'd like 4 books, one to cover people who go to castles,
Yep.
one to cover people who go to sort of stately homes, in Tudor times, things like that, one for all the Victorian stuff, and one for the countryside, because they own a lot of countryside.
Yep.
So we thought, well, yeah, secret diaries would be a great idea. And for the countryside, a bit harder. You can do sort of John Drawbridge, who lives in Castle Times, or you can do a Victorian maid. But this one, I thought, smugglers, because that can get us on the coast, that can get us doing these things. Once you've sorted the format out, so it's written as a diary, and also you don't have to have entries every day, just so you can leave out 5 days, so you don't have the boring bits.
Right.
But once what I did is I made a decision. Firstly, they would write in the cod language. So for medieval times, they would write in cod medieval. Here it would be a bit Uari. But even within that format, is that your phone? Sorry.
Yeah, it is. Don't worry.
My phone won't ring because nobody likes me. It's one of the advantages of being extremely unpleasant online. But even once you've got that format, and a really important thing I realised was, and it gives a clue to how I actually write, was the facts would be not embedded necessarily in the text, but this is illustrated by Jamie Smart as well, who's gone on to be a very successful children's novelist as well as an illustrator. It's funny how people touch the hem of my cloak.
So
what I do is a turn of phrase that someone uses might give you a fact. So rather than thinking, oh, right, I'm going to have to include they did this and that, and in those days they had to wear a hat and there's a tax, and if you do. So a turn of phrase, I doffed my cap to him, little asterisk, in order to keep the wool industry going, it was necessary for people to wear hats. By doing that, so the words could lead me to using the footnotes. So although it's formulaic in that respect, within that there's an enormous amount of freedom. And I have a new series with a chap called Rob Biddulph, who's been wildly successful during lockdown, because he does this draw with Rob thing. And he's book records for the world's biggest draw along. He got that. He got a letter from the government, which was not because he's a rabid Tory, which he may be, but it was as the government, not a political party. Look at that. There we are. So that's the first one in the series. Thank you. And then there's this one. And the thing about the 9 Lives of Fairy Perig Bean Cat, and here's a useful tip. I thought I'd like to write a new series. I'd like to write about Bean Cat, my cat, who died many years ago. And I thought, we all talk about the 9 lives of cats, but what you can do is you can take a regular phrase and twist it. So rather than meaning a cat will get into sticky situations, and whereas we would have died, it has 9 chances of its life carrying on. Why don't we say this is a cat who, when she turns around 3 times, snuggles down and puts her tail in front of her nose. When she wakes up, she's in a different life.
Wow. Okay.
And she has no memory of the previous life or the life she's in, but she will have lived that life. So, for example, when she wakes up at a Victorian railway station, there are photographs, annual photographs of the staff at the railway station, and there she is as a kitten. And there she is, so she's been there all the time. But she doesn't know who her master is. She doesn't know who her friends are, who her enemies are. And she, when she's normally seems to be called to a different life, then there's a need for her to help with something. So in the Pirate Captain's Cat, she wakes up on the top of the Pirate Captain's hat, which is on top of the Pirate Captain's head, and there are cannonballs whizzing around, and a rival pirate crew are trying to take over her ship. A ship's rat talks to her. She doesn't know whether the rat is a friend or an enemy or what's going on. So it's great fun. So each story can be completely different. So although there's a format, so I've written The Library Cat, which will be coming out next year, and after that it's The Witch's Cat. And I wrote that on the understanding that witches aren't magic. There's no such thing. They can't ride broomsticks. So it's really about women being accused of being witches and things like that. Because again, not funny isn't serious. You can be funny and you can be serious. So I'm actually tackling some fun historical issues, and we've got funny business going on with the cat. But you can talk about what you like, because if you're humorous, you can take a young reader anywhere, because humour means it's not difficult. If I was taught maths and it was funny, I suspect I'd be far better at maths today than I am. I do my own VAT return. Give it out.
Are they humorous?
Well, they're creative.
They're creative, yeah. I mean, I think that's something a lot of people struggle with. It's they do their research into historical periods, and then it's a question of how do you incorporate it?
Wear it lightly. Wear it lightly.
Yeah, because I think some people like wear them on their sleeve, don't they, and say,
But
"Look,
really
all the work I've done."
I've done all this bloody research about Victorian docks, so I'm going to get every little thing in it. Whereas if you just put a few little things in, which are interesting, you might not know, and they're right, that lightness of touch it's the iceberg effect. If you see the tip and they think, oh, they must know all this stuff that's underwater, but we're not seeing, I'm in a safe pair of hands. I know this is. Conan Doyle was dreadful. Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes. Behind me there is a bookcase full of Sherlock Holmes books. I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. Conan Doyle was dreadful. We've all heard of Professor Moriarty, his arch nemesis, who only appeared in 2 stories. First name James. We discover Moriarty has a brother. What's his name? James. So there are 2 brothers, both called James Moriarty. John Watson. Sherlock Holmes, Watson, Holmes and Watson, we've all heard that. What's Watson's first name? John. Then why does his wife call him James once? Because Conan Doyle is obsessed with the name James and forgot that he called him John. In The Engineer's Thumb, there is a man with a press who is making false coins. The only problem is, my grandfather was an engineer, the only problem is the reason why they would be found to be obviously fake coins is for the press to be the size it was, the coins would have been bigger than dustbin lids. So someone might have noticed that they weren't real. He didn't give a monkey's armpit about it. But you forgave him because everything else was so perfect. You just blipped over that. It didn't even register. You know?
I'm now going to reread Sherlock Holmes with that in mind. But I suppose what's interesting there is people are kind of retro-engineering those books and trying to make sense out of his errors, aren't they?
Yes, and that's the absolute joy of it. I mean, the great thing about Sherlock Holmes is the conceit is that he was real, he existed, and that Watson was genuinely his biographer and his agent, if you like. And on that basis, there are tomes and tomes. I don't know if I can just tilt back. I don't know if you can see a silhouette there.
I can indeed.
Now, that's in fact 3 books, 3 very fat books, which have more footnotes than
text.
The text, just taking everything. There's in the blue carbuncle, a carbuncle is hidden in the crop of the part of the neck of a Christmas goose. It's stuffed in there to hide it. And then it's pointed out that geese don't have crops. They don't have. So some people argue that actually it wasn't the crop of a goose, it was in the crap of a goose, and it had been hidden in a pile of goose turds, and so, which is a fun way, humorous way of interpreting it, but gets you around it. And then there are other arguments. So if you have to take it as real, there are fantastically complicated ways of justifying what were errors. And some people, a lot of people have continued writing Sherlock Holmes stories since the original canon, and in some of them, the Moriarty family, there are loads of them, and they're all called James. You know, just take it, run with it. And there are six brothers called James and things like that. So that reverse engineering is joyous.
What do you? I mean, clearly, Sherlock Holmes is a huge. Would you say an influence on your writing?
Yes. The joy of Sherlock Holmes, if you're trying to encourage, if people say, oh, well, my son or daughter has read this and that, so I want them to sort of think about moving. Because again, we didn't have young adult books. We went straight from kids' books to Sir Henry Rider Haggard and stuff like that, which was probably written for adults, but has a great beginning, middle, and end. And that's the wonderful thing about a Sherlock Holmes short story. There's a problem, there's the solving of it, and the denouement, and looking at the facts in the middle. And that's the great thing. They have a beginning, a middle, and end. So I read through the short stories, which I still believe are better than the novellas and the long stories. And yes, of course, they had an influence. And so did Charles Dickens, which is why my most successful in terms of international reach with the Eddie Dickens books. He says, leaning out of view. So
I like the fact you've got all these props.
Well, I'm making an effort. This year is the 20th. Hang on, 20th anniversary of the first publication of Eddie Dickens, this character here, and these books were written set in Victorian times. I called him Dickens after Charles Dickens, Eddie because I thought that sounded modern. So by putting them together, it's quite modern, but it's set in the time of Charles Dickens. So Charles Dickens, I love his books. He was an influence. And then later on, because of course he was born pre-Victorian, he was born in 1812, so he was a Georgian, but was writing during Victorian times. And then I took Conan Doyle, who died in 1930, something like that. So Victorian stretches widely, and I did these books without any research. So the joke is that it's what you think happened in Victorian times, without me going, oh, would cameras have been that advanced at the time hot air balloons were like this? None of that. This is what we think it was like. And it started out as one book, which was Awful End.
Yep.
It became 3 books, then it became the trilogy, and then there became another 3 books. And they're the most fun I've ever had with my clothes on, I think. It's in about 37 languages around the world. And
wow.
What I love about that was I actually wrote it just for one boy. I wrote the first book as a series of letters to my nephew, with no intention of publication. And I think, had I written it intending publication, I wouldn't have used certain jokes, because I would have thought, oh, well, that might not understand that. And nowadays, when you read a book, there's a girl hero and a boy hero, and the girl or the boy is American, so that'll time with this. And so much of it you think is written by committee or for committee. And this was one kid, written for me to have fun, for my nephew Ben to have fun, and it ended up in all these different languages in a 6th book. So write with your heart, Don't say, oh, there's a gap. I know a very successful author, and she's really good at finding a gap in the market. I won't name her, but she'll say, oh, there aren't really books about novels about insects, so I'll have insects as an integral part. Oh, there aren't really ones about trains at the moment, so I'll make trains. And she does that, and she does it really, really well. But that's not the way for most people. The way to do it is find a passion and see where it takes you.
So you wrote the first book for your nephew.
Yes.
Not as a book, but then at what point did you decide to cross over from that to putting it out there?
It wasn't through choice. And this is one of these stories I've told a lot that I need to avoid telling in the same pat way, so I shall try. But I wrote a book for Faber and Faber called the Heartless Handbook, Teach Yourself Ancient Egyptian.
Okay.
And it was the first children's book that actually took hieroglyphs seriously, because there are about between 6,000 and 10,000 glyphs, little picture symbols. And every children's book up until then would take 26 phonetic symbols and say, these are the letters of the alphabet. And you can write in code, and this is ancient Egyptian. Well, the first problem is that when writing, the Egyptians didn't really use vowels. So that made it a bit problematic.
Yep.
And the second problem was people weren't translating it into ancient Egyptian. You've got this code, but you're writing in English or French or German or whatever, then you've just got these 26 letters and you're using them. So I actually, in this book, take a look at basic grammar, take a look at the determinatives, because at the end of a word, no gaps between words, so you can't tell where a word ends, but determinative determines what it's about. So you know that the word, whether it's about food or whether it's about a person or whatever. And I took it seriously. And this book came out. And also I said, most obelisks and items, coffins and things you see in museums have set pieces, in the same way that you'll see the 10 Commandments in Christian churches or Lord's Prayer. So if you know some key phrases, you can walk into any museum in the world where they have ancient Egyptian artifacts. You can point at them and you can read them. Impress your
right. Yeah.
I did that. Now, Faber and Faber is now even closer to the British Museum. There's a road on the other side of the road.
There they are. Yeah.
But before that, they were 10 minutes walk from the British Museum. But the British Museum stopped this book, and if it had only sold in the British Museum, I would have done very nicely out of it. Because I would wander up there, if I were in a meeting in Faber, I'd go in, and it was selling and selling and selling.
Wow.
And sadly, one day, someone at the British Museum thought, hey, we've got our own publishing arm, British Museum Press. Why don't we do our own version? So they brought out one and stopped stocking mine. The swine. That was when you're the brand leader, you see people come in and
they do.
But so I did this for Faber, and they asked me to talk about it. And I'm not going to do my normal witty, humorous spiel about what happened there, but basically at the meeting, at the sales conference, where you get the sales team excited about your books, they'll then go to libraries, etc., and promote it and make people buy it for their stock. Something went wrong, and I filled in with humorous comments while we waited. And when it was over, a number of different people from the Faber adult fiction, novel, all that came up to me and said, well, if you're that spontaneously funny, have you thought about writing funny books? And very wisely, I'd kept the letters to my nephew Barry.
Right.
What about this? And eventually, those letters became a book, and they sold and sold and sold, and then from that.
And was the experience of writing, because the first one you didn't write for publication?
That's true. Yeah,
it's like the diary and the importance of being earnest, isn't it? Subsequently meant for publication. But was the experience of writing the second one then, which I guess was being written after the first one had come out?
Indeed, yeah.
Did that feel different? Were your readers kind of ghosts over your shoulders as you were writing it?
Not in that respect, because my method of writing is I see where the words take me.
Right.
If someone is bopped over the head, it'll be very different if they're hit over the head, thwacked over the head, or beaten over the head. Your choice of words will determine the avenue you take.
Okay.
And one of the things people love or hate, and I would far rather have that reaction than Bland's Take It or Leave It, Eddie Dickens books, is that they go off at terrible tangents. We'll be talking about philately, with stamp collection.
Yep.
And then philately, we'll talk about teachers love it because it's a word you have to spell right, and then you get into trouble. And we'll go off at complete tangents. And then eventually we'll end up where we're talking, which again, talking of voices, this is what I've been doing with you. You ask me a question, I go off at a terrible tangent. If I remember, I come back to the starting point. And if I don't, I hate you would have forgotten because you've been entertained anyway.
Yeah.
I've also just noticed that between us, you and I have about the right amount of facial hair, but that's just a little aside. I'll do that with
the average. Yeah, it's good.
And so, although one was written for my nephew Ben, the other was written for anybody and everybody, they were both really written for me. They were written for me to see where my pen would take me and what fun I could have. What then happened was a little-known illustrator then, David Roberts, no credit on the front, I'm pleased to say. He's now incredibly successful. He wasn't on royalties for this book, but I said every time we sold this book to another country, I wouldn't let anyone else do the pictures.
So he
would have to be paid again.
Brilliant.
That was good. But it's very unusual because in Germany they love making popular books look like 1970s books for people who find reading difficult. They take an idea and they try and make it look as unpleasant as possible. But probably my most popular market in the sense of being taken seriously is Germany. I won a major. Do I have that to hand?
Yeah, I was going to mention the award, but I couldn't pronounce it.
Yeah, I'll let you try and pronounce it when I see whether it's anywhere. Here we are.
It was a Welsh award, actually, but
the Head and Schneden, Bed. This.
Well, there we go. Look at this.
An Oscar will not weigh as much as that. I promise you. She's holding the traditional artichoke. No, this was a fantastic award that I wasn't there for. I was actually doing an event at the Wordplay Festival in Swansea in Wales, which is a fantastic and incredibly worthwhile. You get 3,000 of the top. You get 3,000 kids get to see some of the top writers from the UK and Ireland in the space of a week. And it's absolutely wonderful. Very deprived areas where immigrants who can't even speak English are dumped in the middle of Wales.
Right.
And it was absolutely fantastic. So I was there for that, whilst my translator went and accepted this award on live television.
Wow.
And he had a very impressive beard. His name was Harry Rote, and he played Harry the Bum in a soap opera over there and was very popular in his own right. When I go there, sometimes people wouldn't let me sign my own books. They get Harry to sign it and move off before I had a chance. But he stood up and in German said, I'm sorry, Philip Ardagh can't be here today. People often mistake us for each other because we both have beards. But Philip's is slightly different in that it divides in two so that he can urinate standing up.
Brilliant.
Live television. Anyone who ever met me thereafter would be looking to see if there was signs of drippage. But he's dead now and I'm not. So, look who's laughing last.
And that award would, of course, be a murder weapon in a Conan Doyle, probably.
Absolutely. Or you'd smash it open and there'd be a hidden gem.
Yeah, the mystery of the artichoke and the the
Sussex artichoke.
What what was the moment like when you received the first copy of your first to be published book? Can you remember that kind of opening an envelope moment?
I can remember with certain books. I can't necessarily. There are landmark moments, I think, in being a published writer, but I can means getting that book. I mean, getting Awful End. I'd had books published before. Awful End was a very exciting thing to do. In those days, there was no expectation of me. I'd been primarily a non-fiction writer of children's books, done nicely. They had in those days, very few non-fiction children's authors appearing at festivals and things like that. I think one year I did 3 events in 2 days at Edinburgh because they needed non-fiction people. So that was all lovely and that was very nice. But getting that fiction, getting Awful End with David Roberts' fantastic illustration and not knowing where it could go, and it sold and sold and sold. They didn't have any advertising behind it at all. It was word of mouth, and that's a wonderful thing when that happens because publishers love it because it doesn't cost them anything. So it was selling more and more and more and more, and we just didn't know where it was going to end. So that was wonderful. No expectation, and then people do have expectations, and it's more of a stress. But as long as you love the writing, people go, "Hey, you're always on Twitter. Hey, I always see you in these exotic places. I'm very fortunate. I'm very mean. If it comes to take my family on holiday, we might go to Cornwall or something like that. But I fly all over the world: Australia, America, China." Because of my books, but they assume that I'm always out there leading this glamorous life. But you have to remember that the majority of my time I am on my own writing, and as long as that is the most important thing, it's not about being a writer. When I mentioned about coming on this, Sarah Churchwell, I always get her name wrong, but that wonderful American academic who I've been at with various history festivals, she said there are lots of people who would like to have written a book that don't want to write one. And that's true. It's like when you're young and in the old stereotypical way, if you're a woman and got married, you'd often take your husband's name. There would be girls practicing their first name with this name, and then they extend that, and it's authors practicing their signature before they've even written a book to sign. Then there are people posting mood boards of what their story is going to be. I hate to tell you this. To be a published author, you have to write the book. And when I say write, I'm including that element which some people talk of editing. You write, you rewrite, you put it aside, you do something else, you come back to it, you write it again. You don't show it to everybody, and when you do, you don't ask them to say it's the best thing I've ever read.
No.
You ask it to get an opinion, and part of that is deciding whether you agree with them. You don't go, "Well, what do you know?" And you say, "Well, you did ask me to read it." You have to decide what you think is a valid opinion. Why should I be interested in this person? Well, it's just me, thinly disguised. Yeah, well, that's why they're interested in you. But what is it? But this bit, really, I mean, I'm interested. Why don't you say? I mean, because you know all about working in nuclear power, you don't bother. What if you expand on that and introduce this idea? So, but a lot of people don't. They're not interested in that. They want the end game. They want to be on late review going, you've got to want to write. And another thing people say to me, which is true, people go, I've been into W.H. Smith, pretend bookshop that sells lots of books. I've been into Smith's and I've seen books that aren't as good as mine on the shelves. And I go, I don't argue with that. There are probably some books out there which could have been done better, or
shouldn't have been done at all.
But they persevered. They had this idea for something, and they stuck with it. And they maybe changed bits they agreed with, didn't change bits, sent it out, but they stuck at it. Whereas you sent it to me, I raised my complaints and my problems, my issues to try and help you. And said which bits I like. So there's some bits, but you've given up. So it's about so many different things. It's not just about writing.
You collaborate a lot, and I'm interested in you collaborated with other writers, with illustrators. There's a story I like about about Rodgers and Hammerstein, who between them wrote some of the great sort of musicals. And somebody was interviewing Richard Rodgers and said, so what comes first? Is it the music or the lyrics? And he said it's the contract, which I think is a great story. And I just wondered, I mean, have you written text to follow illustrations, or are your books always illustrated, or is it a wonderful kind of?
That's really interesting. With something like, sorry, you can admire
your shoulders
fine
this morning.
Elbow there. I do know my R's from my elbow. Right, so this is a book, Bunnies on the Bus. What it might interest people to know is that when Axel Scheffler illustrated the Gruffalo, he was never in the same room with Julia Donaldson.
Okay.
They didn't sit down and discuss it. He was given the text. He went away and drew it, some pencil roughs. They go back to Julia and the designer and the editor, and they go, oh, I think he looks a bit frightening, or I think his nose should be bigger. And they can work individually. And you can have situations where the author sends in a text. It's like a script. And they might say, and in this picture, you can see that one of the rabbits is behind a clock, and the rabbit's ears match the time shown on the clock exactly, brackets, tee. And the publishing company will strip out all that, not be seen by the illustrator, and it's sent to the illustrator, and then the illustrator will add their interpretation to it. And I know there's a wonderful picture book writer for younger children called Tracy Cordray. And I believe, and if you're watching Tracy, which is highly unlikely, I believe she wrote a script, I think with intention of the character being a mouse. Okay. And when we got the pencil roughs back, it was a hippopotamus. And that's wonderful, because you are, in a sense, letting go. So Bunnies on the Bus, Bunnies on the Bus. No wonder there's a fuss about the bunnies on the bus. In this book, I wrote it. I wrote some detailed things that I thought need to be in there. They stripped them out and they sent it to Ben Mantle. We agreed on Ben. I was given some sample, because I've been around long enough, I might get treated nicer than some people. So no one said, you will have Ben. But I saw Ben's work and I liked it, and he went away and did it. And he has added a whole story in here that I don't have. This is a story about some bunnies that hijack a bus. The story actually starts before you even get beyond the title page. But what Ben did was, in addition to this story, we can see there's a newspaper article there saying escaped. And there are two squirrels wearing bandit masks. And as the story progresses, oh, blimey, who's that in the bin there? It's the very squirrels. And they get involved in a jewel heist, and that story runs parallel. Nothing to do with me. Of course, I'll take the credit. Of course, and if it wins, as it will, many major awards, I am quite large and fat, and I will stand in front of Ben and make sure that he's not seen. But when I then got it back, I'd say, look, I love this, but let's have this element in there and that. And for the next book, because I've now met Ben and know Ben, I've actually inputted more. So he will still do all these wonderful things and have wonderful parallel stories going on and things. So in that respect, it's not a straightforward collaboration. Whereas with a writer-illustrator called Alyssa Elwick, for example, with this book called You Can't Count on Dinosaurs, which I wrote and she illustrated, it's about the dangers of having a counting book with dinosaurs, because Tyrannosaurus Rex will eat. So one dinosaur, yes, it's true, along comes another one. That makes two. Two dinosaurs running around a tree, along comes another one. That makes two. Rex. You didn't. So, but this was because she did a dinosaur mural for one of her nieces, and I saw it and I said, hey, let's do a dinosaur book. But in that respect, inspired by her mural, but me writing it. But we did a series about stick and fetch. About 20 years ago, I came up with some characters called Burger and Fries, and she was Sally Burger. And she has her dog French Fries, who was an untrimmed French poodle, hence French Fries, Burger and Fries, great.
Right.
So when I started working with Alyssa, we bounced off ideas together and things. We went to the publishers and went, Burgers and Fries. And they said, oh, that sounds a bit fatty. We don't think on Mum's Net. Oh, dear, no, the calories you put on. So, oh, stick and fetch. And we worked very collaboratively there. So although I'm ultimately writing the words and things, we are discussing, well, wouldn't it be great if it happened? No, I like that, Philip, but no, Alyssa, but going with what you said, and that, so that's very collaborative in that process. So there's a real mixture. And Someone I love working with is, he says, looking at his name, pretending
upside down,
Tom Morgan-Jones.
Okay.
I realised that I write semi-historical books, like on the National Trust one I showed earlier. There's a circle which I insist they put on it that said, "Only the facts are true." So the character didn't exist, their adventure didn't exist, but all the details are factually correct. So if she wore a hat, went through a door, looked at a stained glass window, read a book, all that would be factually correct. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to write a book where you just don't give a monkey's armpit?
Yeah.
And this is called Norman the Norman from Normandy. And this is Little Norman. And Big Norman is killed. So Little Norman gets sent his broadsword through the post, along with a little tapestry saying, "We're sorry for your loss." And it's from the Bretons, who killed his dad, Big Norman, the Norman from Normandy, because there was a misunderstanding, a fight ensued, and a whole load of Bretons killed his dad. And because they respected him as a great Norman, one of them buried his head, one of them buried his torso, and one of them buried his legs. And Little Norman, the Norman from Normandy, who is too small to ride a horse, so he rides a not so wild boar there called Truffles. Decides he will go and pay his respects to various parts of his father, but because he's very small and can't handle the sword, when he turns around, he slices the head off the first one. On his journey, he has befriended an extraordinarily poisonous toad, who the second one mistakes because the second one had an argument with a witch about his curtains. Then his wife disappears, so he assumes the witch has turned his wife into a frog, kisses the toad thinking it's a frog. It's very poisonous. He falls out of the window and dies. And I won't tell you how the third one is killed. So in effect, he has avenged the death of his father by mistake. So it's wonderful to be able to write a book contains stuff about body parts and to warn people we've got the police tape there, because I do miss the good old stories where you can have horrible things happen.
So do you feel there's almost no area you can't go into if you do it with a lightness of touch?
I think you could. I wrote a book. I wrote a series called Unlikely Exploits, and the second book was called Heir of Mystery, but rather than AIR, it's spelled HEIR, as in Inheritor of Mystery.
Yep.
And it begins, "This is a book about death." And it says one of the good things about death is that when it's your birthday, you won't get a leaf folded in half with a very bad charcoal drawing from your great 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 and so forth grandparents. It would be very crowded if people didn't die. And just think of the anecdotes. I mean, we're worrying about Christmas over here in the UK at the moment, and in Northern Ireland there are extra period stuff. You know, imagine if you had to think about all those relatives. But then again, you wouldn't, because of course COVID wouldn't kill anyone because you didn't have death. So there are advantages to death. And when I was in Norway, where it's dark most of the year, This is a book about death is front page news. I was taken incredibly seriously over there because again they realised that the opposite of funny isn't serious. It's funny. Yeah. And it does tackle death. But I would be very careful. I wouldn't make light of someone losing a parent. I have a funeral, which is real fun, an anagram of real fun. I have a funeral in one of the Unlikely Exploit books where a sibling is dead and they're throwing in objects that, that wouldn't might be interesting. One of them throws in a ball that bounces out and hits the preacher and they're all laughing like crazy. It's the funniest funeral I've ever been to. But I mean, Lamb, not as in carving the joint, but Lamb as in the author. He saw the humor in things. We do use humor. If your job is to scrape up people like raspberry jam off the motorway after an accident, you're allowed to say something funny to alleviate the tension. And one of the greatest things, one of the great joys of writing books is getting letters. I don't say you can email me, because I get so much correspondence. And if I did that, I just couldn't go. I mean, people sometimes wait 2 years for a reply from me. I don't know if they wait eagerly, but I will reply. But it takes, if they put the address, some people are going, "You never replied." And I go, "Well, you never put your address." But very early on with Awful End, when it was in Smith's Travel, which used to be the, before Menzies, and it used to be the one that would be in all the stations.
Yes, yeah.
I got a letter from this lad and he said, it may have been his father. I said, I was going to my father's funeral and I was going to have a long train journey and I knew nothing about you, and I bought this book because the cover looked good. Thank you, David Roberts.
Yep.
And he was on the train, he read it, and he said, I thought I'd never laugh again, and I laughed on that train journey. And I went,
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And it proves what intelligent and good-looking readers I have, because for him to realise that was something special, and to write to me and tell me, I mean, that's a huge thing, and it's a responsibility, but it's a wonderful thing.
But
Go on.
I was going to say, primarily, at the beginning of every journey you go on, you are writing for yourself, are you?
For me, yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so bad at ages. People say, what age is this for? And I go, 56, 57. When I was 56 and 57. Yeah. I like to believe that books find people. Books have found me over the years. You know, I've always loved libraries. I've always loved book tokens, and as a kid, I book tokens. And I look at things, and I very rarely read blurbs on the back of books because they can't help but give the game away. But I'll look at a cover or just dip in, and sometimes you'll be at waiting for a train, and there's a 10p a book box outside a shop that's shut, but they leave books out.
Leave the money,
And I think the excitement of finding something like that is wonderful. And I like to think that some people will find one of my books that way, and then maybe investigate others and go, oh, it's a shame that was the best one, or wow, he's written even more.
Do you have more ideas than you're ever going to have enough years to write? Are you someone who's like...
So I like to think so. I earn my living as a writer. I know many writers who are wonderful writers who don't do that. You don't have to. It's not compulsory. Philip Larkin did all right in his poetry, and he was a librarian. But it does put a different emphasis on me, because I have obviously an extraordinarily lazy family. The light, the computer I'm talking to you on, this is paid for by me, and I don't have someone who supports me in any way, shape, or form, and I don't teach creative writing or anything like that. So it is slightly different, because I do have to write for a living, and that does mean maybe occasionally you'll take on things you won't, but they can take you down great. Oxford University Press have these wonderful collections where you can't buy one book, but you might get a pack of books, and they're written for a specific thing. And I recently wrote one called Frank the Not So Boring Fish.
Brilliant.
I had such great fun with that, and I have to say, not least because Alex Patrick did the illustrations, and this is when Frank has got so big he's in a wheelbarrow being wheeled away, and he's beginning to look a little bit dodgy there, and he's got there. Oh, he looks quite sweet there in his wheelbarrow. And he gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and gets put in. I think he's put in a huge tank here. But I'm delighted to say, at the end, Frank turns out to be Frankie, and when she's in the wild, she comes back and she shows the boy who helped him family of little fishes she's had there.
Wow.
It's great fun. I've got a fish story in me. Flash 2 is a fish in our house. He doesn't get enough publicity. I've got, fairy Perry bean cats out there. Why not big up the fish and have some fun with that?
So with something like that, because I know that if I had a nephew or niece of the right age, and I said, do you want to read a book called Frank the Not So Boring Fish? Obviously they would. It's a great title.
I do write very quickly, because I'm a professional. I have timed my non-alcoholic beverage almost down to the last.
No, brilliantly.
But I would say I often come up with titles before stories.
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
When the story I talk about, this is a book about death, Air of Mystery. One of the reasons why I wrote The 9 Lives of Fairy Perry Bean Cat as a series was I thought they're going to have to buy 9 books. So I need to root out my head. Great, if it's The 9 Lives of Fairy Perry Bean Cat, they will have to buy 9. But they're very clever, because they thought I couldn't take. They said we'll buy 4 to start with, because they knew I couldn't then take the other 5 somewhere else, because they're not as stupid as they look. But The 9 Lives of Fairy Perry Bean Cat, that's a high concept idea. It's explained in a line. But when I wrote the Unlikely Exploit series, I thought The Fall of Fergal will be about a boy who falls out of a window and is killed.
Okay.
And the story will go in 2 directions. It will take us back to before he's dead, and we will come to see how he dies. So when he falls out of the window at the beginning, we don't care, because we haven't invested any emotional time with him. It's not like Harry Potter or Doctor Who dying. It's just a kid falling out of the window. It's written in a humorous way. Dead. Go back and lead towards it. You begin to care about him, and particularly because I also go forward and show the consequence of his death. So I said, I'll call that one The Fall of Fergal. For us to find out a bit more about it, I'll call the second one The Air of Mystery. His name is Fergal McNally, and the last one I'll call The Rise of the House of McNally, because it has a sort of Fall of the House of Asher. There's a lot of that going on. And I had the titles before I had the full stories, and I managed to sell it on the basis of a bit about the first story and the titles. And I love that, because I've said from the outset, I go where the words take me. Sometimes they're dead ends, and I retrace. Sometimes they take me in a wonderful direction, and I go back and change something earlier to make that work better. But the actual words have such an important impact on the events as well.
Does that mean you very rarely suffer from writer's block because you go where the words take you?
Yeah, and they can be wonderful dead ends, and they might be an idea for another story, but you're thinking, no, this really doesn't belong here. But I always urge people never to throw anything away. Different in the old days, because you literally had to print it out, you typed it out, whatever, and you just put it in the bottom drawer. And I used elements in, I think, the third Eddie Dickens book, After Awful End. I used elements about someone painting a ceiling using a sort of Leonardo da Vinci type contraption to wheel along and painting on the ceiling, because I had an instant a chimney. I often have in Eddie Dickens, one character knows is in the book, and that's Eddie Dickens' father, Mr. Dickens. So if they go, "Are you hurt?" You go, "It's very unlikely that a major character such as myself would be killed off." So, but no one knows what to talk about, because they don't know they're in a book. But he has a chimney fall on him, and there's a wonderful picture David Roberts does of this wonderful barley twist chimney with just a little bit like a hattie fat now, the little arm sticking out at the side. And so he's got a bad back. I thought, he's got a bad back. He could lie on the back of this contraption I wrote about years ago. But little touches, I use non-fiction touches in my fiction books, because the whole show don't tell thing doesn't apply in non-fiction so much, because you say he died in 1743. So rather than having to go, you just say it. So I state that Awful End, which is the name of the house, where Laudanum, unfortunate first name, Laudanum Dickens, Eddie's dad, does his paintings on the ceiling, where everything looks like sort of liver sausage. So everything has a liver sausage. But sadly, if you were to go to Awful End today, you wouldn't see it, because it was whitewashed in the 1930s. And that sounds really credible, but it's all in my head. I'm using a non-fiction trick to make my fiction seem real.
I think Only the Facts Are True is an absolutely brilliant. I'm not sure what the equivalent should be on Donald Trump's autobiography, just to come back to him. Only the
right. There should be a picture of a ghost who's the person who actually wrote the book. Maybe they'll let him do some crayon work in the end papers, which would be nice.
It'd be tremendous crayon work, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be lovely. It would be the goodly best.
Yeah, the bigly best ever.
Thank you. Yeah.
I can't believe the hour has. Your drink has been perfect. Your beard has behaved.
Professional. My cup of tea. When you see the striations, it's just remarkable, isn't it?
And I'm left with this vision of you peeing standing up without damaging your beard.
What a nice positive note to end on. Thank you.
There's so much to take away from that, I think.
Right. Could I give you one of my cards? Well, neither of you qualify for this, but I do have these cards, which is just.
Thank you for sharing your beard with us. It certainly brought me pleasure.
I love doing that. If I do festivals and things, and there are people, and they're normally writing notes, and just go and hand them, because I think the sharing of a beard is a beautiful thing. And if anyone passed by and couldn't give a monkeys about writing, and they just caught a glimpse of this winter plumage, it brought joy.
It's a lot shorter than it used to be, your beard.
It is indeed. In lockdown, I've been. I'm glad I didn't say what I was thinking in my head, but yes, I've been trimming. And
I think we all know what you was thinking.
Thank you.
That was good. Thank you for your time, generosity, and all of that. Because I think actually looking at the comments, somebody here said, "I don't give a monkey's armpit" is now their favourite phrase. So
that's wonderful. Will I be able to read these later? Because I'm so giving. You've noticed
it's been really
humble nature that I've given myself so completely to you. I haven't read, but will they stay up there and I can?
We can do that.
Could I think
the point about writing is about writing, I think, is a great one.
That's on Twitter. You will have people telling you read, and that's great. Of course it is, because reading is wonderful, and also you want to know what else is out there, and you want to. But the most important thing is to write and write and write and write. Could I just say thank you very much to you, Simon, and to you, Sam?
Thank you.
Have a thoroughly enjoyable time.
And we'll enjoy. I'm going to go and read about Frank, who was a not so boring fish.
Thank you. A vastly entertaining fish. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Watching. We seem to have lost Vanessa. I can't hear her, but I don't know.
Sorry.
We're still live?
We are still live, yeah. There we go. I'm just come in
Well,
now.
that was a really kind of, this is that moment when the newsreader kind of pretends to be writing something.
The pair of you. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we'll see you all